All I did was lock my gate, and the HOA lost their minds. What started as a simple no uncovered years of corruption, threats, and lies. You won't believe how far they went, and how it all backfired. For as long as I could remember, my little patch of land by Cedar Lake had been a haven of peace. The birds knew my porch swing. The morning breeze that swept off the water carried more than just fresh air. It carried memories of cookouts, quiet afternoons, and the life I'd built after retiring early. I wasn't a troublemaker. I kept to myself, paid my taxes, maintained my lawn, and waved to neighbors. Life, until recently, had been simple, predictable, good. But peace, I've learned, is a fragile thing. It all began on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. I was sipping coffee, watching the lake glisten through the back window, when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Through the peephole, I saw her, Jennifer Wilson, the president of the Maple Springs HOA. Pearl necklace, clipboard in hand, lips pursed like someone late to her manicure. "Afternoon," I greeted, keeping my tone polite. She didn't bother with pleasantries. "The board had an emergency meeting last night," she snapped. "We voted. You need to provide a key to your gate." I blinked. "Gate?" She gestured vaguely toward the back of the house. "The one blocking lake access. People have used that path for decades. Your new gate is unacceptable." I stepped outside, keeping my composure. "That gate is on my land. The path, too. I had the deed checked before I bought the property." Jennifer smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You're mistaken. We have what's called established use. It's common law. The community needs access." Now, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm not naive either. "There's no easement," I told her, "and I've had no trespassing signs posted for 6 months. My lawyer confirmed the HOA has no rights to my land." Her tone sharpened. "Section 7 of our bylaws says homeowners must support community access. You're in violation." "Section 7, I replied calmly, "only applies to common property. My land is private." That's when she leaned in and said it, the moment everything changed. "You can either give us the key, or things can get very uncomfortable for you." Her smile returned, but this time it chilled me to the bone. Suddenly this wasn't about rules. It wasn't about a path or a gate. It was about power, control, and how far some people are willing to go to get what they want. I handed her my lawyer's card and shut the door. From that moment on, the calm life I'd built at Cedar Lake was gone, and I had no idea just how deep the rot went behind that polished HOA exterior. That night, sleep didn't come easy. I kept checking the security app on my phone, half expecting something. And around 11:30 p.m., something came. The motion alert blinked red. 3 figures hovered near my back gate, shadows shifting beneath the floodlight. I zoomed in, and there she was, Jennifer, unmistakable in her signature blonde bob. Beside her stood Robert Davis, the HOA treasurer, and Michael Thompson, their so-called facilities manager. Robert was holding something shiny and sharp, a bolt cutter. My hands trembled as I hit record and dialed the sheriff. By the time I made it downstairs and opened the front door, a patrol car was already pulling up. Officer James, a tall, no-nonsense type with years in his eyes, stepped out. I showed him the footage, his jaw clenched. "They're trying to cut through your lock," he said. "Let's take a look." The padlock on my gate bore fresh, deep gouges. Footprints littered the soft soil. They were gone, but they hadn't covered their tracks. "This is attempted breaking and entering," he muttered, jotting it down in his notebook. "You want to press charges?" I didn't even hesitate. "Yes." Then headlights lit up my driveway again. A silver SUV eased in, and out stepped Jennifer, with Robert right behind her, bold as brass. "Officer," Jennifer called, her voice honey-dipped with false concern. "We were just inspecting community property. This man has blocked lake access, which is—" "Ma'am," Officer James cut her off, calm but firm. "According to county records, this is private land, and you were caught on security footage attempting to damage private property. That's a crime." Her smile dropped like a curtain. "This is an HOA matter," she snapped. "Our bylaws—" "Bylaws don't override state law," Officer James replied. "I suggest you check with a lawyer before this escalates further." She left without another word, but the next morning, the retaliation came fast and thick. 5 separate violation notices were taped to my door. Hedge height, mailbox color, unapproved garden border, excessive water use, and unauthorized security modifications. Each one carried a $100 daily fine. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't even creative. It was intimidation. Old school, petty, paper-thin intimidation. I called my lawyer. They've drawn battle lines, I said. Good, he replied. That means they've got something to hide. I photographed everything, my yard, my mailbox, my water meter. Everything was code compliant. But this wasn't about code, this was about power, and the lengths people would go to when they felt it slipping through their fingers. And just like that, my gate became more than a barrier. It became a line in the sand. They wanted a fight? They were about to get one. But it wouldn't be the kind they were used to. This time, it would be on my terms. By the time I got home from a quick grocery run, the damage had already been done. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed something off about the gate. I dropped the bags in the entryway and rushed out to the path that led down to the lake, and my heart sank. My padlock, the one I installed to protect my property, was gone. In its place, a shiny, brand-new lock I'd never seen before. A bold white note fluttered in the breeze, taped just beneath it. Community access restored. Contact the HOA office for your key. It felt like a punch to the chest. They'd destroyed my lock, on my gate, on my land, in broad daylight. Hands shaking, I called the police. This time, Officer Reynolds showed up, younger than the last officer, but just as serious. He documented everything, the destroyed lock, the replacement, the smug little note. I handed him the footage from my security camera. Sure enough, around noon, there they were, Jennifer, Robert, and that ever-present handyman, with bolt cutters. This is vandalism and criminal trespassing, Officer Reynolds said firmly. Would you like to press charges? Without hesitation, I replied. Just then, my elderly neighbor Grace Mitchell appeared along the fence line. Her sun hat bobbed as she shuffled toward us, worry creasing her face. I saw it all, she whispered. My bird-watching camera caught everything. They weren't even sneaky about it. Her eyes were tired, but her voice was steady. And I'm tired of being afraid of them. I nearly hugged her right there on the spot. Grace had lived next to this property for over 30 years. Her testimony and her camera were going to be gold. Later that afternoon, my phone rang again. It was Robert Davis, the HOA treasurer. His voice was cold, clipped, and loaded with arrogance. You've made a serious mistake involving the police, he said. But the board is willing to forgive and forget if you drop the charges immediately. I'm not interested in forgiveness, I said calmly. I'm interested in justice. His tone darkened. Jennifer knows people. Her husband golfs with your department head every Sunday. You really want to risk your career over a stupid gate? The line went quiet as I let that threat hang in the air. Then, without another word, I hung up. I'd always believed HOA disagreements were mostly about paint colors and lawn heights. But this was something darker. This was manipulation, abuse, and power wrapped in legal paperwork and phony civility. I replaced their lock with a reinforced one of my own, bought the highest-rated security cameras I could find, and posted bright red signs around the perimeter. Private property. Trespassers will be prosecuted. Surveillance in use. 24/7. Recording. That evening, as the sun dipped below the lake's edge, I stood by the gate, a little piece of iron, wood, and principle, and made a promise. They thought they could scare me into submission, but I wasn't going anywhere. The battle wasn't just about a lock anymore. It was about the principle. It was about neighbors like Grace who'd been bullied into silence. It was about truth. And they were about to learn the hard way that some fences protect more than just land. They protect legacies. The next morning, it felt like the air had shifted. My phone buzzed nonstop before sunrise. Voicemails, emails, messages from neighbors I barely knew. Why are you blocking lake access? Are you really suing the HOA? What did you do to upset Jennifer? Confused and still half asleep, I opened the Maple Springs Community app, and there it was. A glowing red alert at the top. Emergency meeting tonight. Homeowner blocks historic lake path. Jeopardizes community use. Beneath it was a photo of my gate, zoomed in and framed to look like I'd built a fortress, complete with an angry caption accusing me of selfishly privatizing public land and damaging community property value. I felt my heart drop into my stomach. The post already had over 70 comments, most of them venomous, some downright cruel. I saw names I recognized, people who had smiled at me just last week, now calling me a threat to the neighborhood. One even suggested I be fined out of the community. But that wasn't the end of it. By noon, I had received 5 separate HOA violation notices via email, each carrying a $100 per day fine. The infractions? My mailbox color was non-compliant. My garden's border stones were unauthorized modifications. My hedge was too tall. My sprinkler timer allegedly violated community water usage guidelines. Even my motion sensor security lights were labeled as unapproved alterations. It was a list so absurd it would have been funny if it hadn't been real. If it hadn't come with a daily fine tally nearing $500. This wasn't enforcement. This was punishment. Retaliation, clear as day. I called my lawyer, Mark, who calmly listened and then said the words I was too proud to admit I needed to hear. We're going to fight this, and we're going to win. He drafted a formal cease and desist letter to the HOA board, citing harassment, discriminatory enforcement, and abuse of power. But as I prepared for the evening's meeting, I could feel the walls closing in. Jennifer wasn't just flexing her authority. She was trying to paint me as the villain, turn the entire neighborhood against me. And it was working. I couldn't go out to check my mailbox without feeling eyes on me. A neighbor crossed the street rather than pass my house. Kids who used to wave stopped waving. The very air felt heavier, poisoned by whispers and HOA-approved gossip. But I wasn't alone. Grace, my neighbor, knocked that afternoon with a small envelope in hand. "Thought you might want to see what they've been circulating," she said softly. Inside were copies of emails from Jennifer and Robert, sent to select homeowners, urging them to attend tonight's meeting to prevent further deterioration of community standards, language carefully chosen to sound legal, but aimed squarely at me. My lawyer looked over the materials and shook his head. "This is a coordinated smear campaign," he said. "They're trying to isolate you so you cave." I took a deep breath and glanced out the window at my gate, still standing strong. My grandfather once told me, "The test of a man isn't what he builds when things are easy, it's what he stands for when things get hard." Well, things were hard now, but I wasn't bending. That night, as I prepared my folder of documents, evidence, and property records for the emergency meeting, I wasn't just defending a gate anymore. I was defending truth, dignity, and every homeowner who had ever been too afraid to speak up. They thought a smear campaign would silence me. Instead, it only made me louder. The sun hadn't even set when I arrived at the community center for the emergency HOA meeting, my folder of documents pressed tightly under one arm, and my lawyer, Mark, walking beside me with quiet confidence. I hadn't set foot in this building since the holiday potluck last December, back when I still believed Maple Springs was the peaceful, tight-knit neighborhood the brochures had promised. Now, it felt more like walking into a courtroom, except the jury was made up of my neighbors. The parking lot was packed. Word had spread fast. Over 50 residents had shown up, some out of curiosity, others out of anger, and a few, I hoped, in quiet support. We stepped through the door, and the room fell into a sudden hush. Jennifer stood at the front, a smug smile on her face, flanked by Robert the treasurer and Michael from facilities. On the projector screen behind her was a blown-up image of my locked gate, circled in red like a crime scene photo. "This is a private homeowners meeting," Jennifer announced, her voice cool and dismissive. "Outsiders are not welcome." "I'm not an outsider," I said, louder than I expected. "I own property here. I have every right to be present, and this man," I gestured to Mark, "is my legal counsel." Several heads turned. Some neighbors looked shocked. Others looked relieved. Mark stepped forward, calm and composed. "Before any votes or actions are taken tonight, you should all be aware this meeting violates your own bylaws. 2 weeks' notice is required for any official HOA vote. Any action you take tonight could be challenged in court and likely overturned." Jennifer's composure cracked, just slightly. "We're only discussing community concerns," she replied, her knuckles whitening as she gripped the podium. "Then let's have a discussion," I said, walking up to the front, "because the HOA board has misled this community, repeatedly." I opened my folder and held up my property deed, with county maps that clearly marked my land extending all the way to the lake path. There is no easement, no shared access. This is private property, and it always has been. A murmur ran through the crowd. Several people shifted in their chairs. A man in the back raised his hand. "But Jennifer told us it had been community land for decades." Mark nodded. "We checked the zoning history, surveyed the property lines, and verified with the county recorder's office. There is no record, not even a pending one, of any public access path through my client's land. And more than that," I added, flipping to the next page, "I have video footage of HOA board members cutting my lock, trespassing, vandalizing my gate. That's not just unethical, that's criminal." Right on cue, Officer Reynolds entered from the back of the room. "We are currently investigating those actions," he announced. "We have multiple witness statements, video evidence, and physical damage documented. And we're also looking into possible financial misconduct based on recent complaints." Gasps rippled through the room. That's when Grace stood up, tiny silver-haired Grace. The woman who'd lived next door since the 80s and whose voice barely rose above a whisper, until tonight. "I've attended every HOA meeting for 5 years," she said, holding up a stack of handwritten notes. "And I've seen how this board operates. The fines, the threats, the missing financial statements. Enough is enough." Cheers broke out. Others stood. A quiet man I'd only seen walking his dog said, "They fined me for putting in a ramp for my wife's wheelchair. Said it wasn't visually cohesive." Another neighbor added, "They tried to evict me over a flower bed. It's always been about control." The tide had turned. Jennifer tried to speak again, but no one was listening. In that moment, I wasn't just the troublemaker with the gate. I was someone who had stood firm, someone who'd forced the truth to the surface. And now, surrounded by neighbors who had once been strangers, I realized this fight had grown into something far greater than me. It wasn't just about a gate. It was about restoring trust, about standing up to intimidation, and reminding people that integrity still matters. As the meeting adjourned, Mark leaned over and whispered, "That was the turning point." He was right, because now I wasn't just defending my land, I was helping this entire community reclaim its voice. The next morning, before the dew had even dried from the grass, the real threat arrived. Not with bolt cutters or padlocks, but in the form of tailored suits and polite intimidation. I was sipping coffee in my kitchen, watching birds flit through the dogwood tree, when the doorbell rang. Outside stood 5 people, Jennifer, Robert, and 3 others from the HOA board, all dressed like they were headed to a courtroom rather than my front porch. "Mr. Davis," Jennifer said curtly, arms crossed, "we're here to offer you one final chance to resolve this situation amicably." Behind her, Robert's glasses glinted in the sun, his expression unreadable. The other 3, 2 unfamiliar faces and 1 woman I recognized vaguely from the HOA newsletter, stood with clipboards and carefully neutral smiles. I stepped out, phone in hand, camera recording openly. "If this is another attempt to trespass or threaten, I'd like to document it properly." "No need to be dramatic," Robert replied, his voice syrupy. "We're simply offering you a chance to settle the matter quietly, before things escalate to professional consequences." I tilted my head. "Professional?" Jennifer smiled, but not kindly. "It's come to our attention that your employer values community involvement. As you know, my husband sits on the mayor's advisory board. He often golfs with your manager, wonderful man, loyal to the HOA's goals." There it was, the veiled threat. Not about grass height or mailbox paint this time, but my livelihood. "You're threatening my job?" I asked, louder now. No, Jennifer said quickly, glancing at the neighbors watching from across the street. "We're simply suggesting that continuing this combative behavior might reflect poorly on your reputation, especially if the HOA is forced to take legal action." A clipboard was held out to me. "This is a professional agreement," one of the suited strangers explained. "You grant access to the gate. In return, all violations are dropped. No special assessments, no liens, and we consider the matter closed." I didn't take the pen. I didn't even look at the paper. "You've already tried to smear me in the neighborhood app. You vandalized my property. You forged a lock. Now you want to pretend this is diplomacy?" "We're offering you peace," Jennifer said, her voice tightening, "before the situation affects your future." I paused, not because I was scared, but because I suddenly realized just how far they were willing to go. They weren't just trying to control my property. They wanted to control me. I looked straight at Jennifer. "Let me be very clear. My job isn't yours to dangle. My dignity isn't yours to buy, and my land isn't up for negotiation." The silence was thick. "You have 30 seconds to leave my property," I said evenly, "or I'll press criminal trespass charges and share this recording with the news outlets who've already reached out." Jennifer opened her mouth but didn't speak. Robert muttered something under his breath as they turned, retracing their steps like a defeated parade. As they drove off, my phone buzzed with a message from Grace. "They just parked in front of the clubhouse. Jennifer's on the phone again. Be ready." I was, because this wasn't just a neighborhood dispute anymore. It was a campaign of coercion, one that had just crossed a very personal line. And now, it wasn't just my gate I was defending. It was my name, my career, and every neighbor who'd ever been pushed into silence by a clipboard and a thinly veiled threat. By the time the sun began to dip behind the trees that lined Cedar Lake, something in our neighborhood had begun to stir, not with shouts or protest signs, but with murmurs, glances, and quiet conversations on porches. The community was shifting. It began with Grace. She showed up at my front door, hands shaking slightly, holding a small folder and a determined look in her eyes. "I've kept notes," she said simply. "For years. I never thought they'd matter, but now, well, they might." Inside the folder were handwritten records of every HOA meeting she had attended since her husband passed away, who was present, what was discussed, and what never made it into the official minutes. At first, I was stunned. Then, as I flipped through the pages, I realized what I was holding wasn't just a paper trail. It was a lifeline. She leaned across the table. "I know they fined you for that gate. They fined me last year for repainting my porch without pre-approval, even though it's the same color it's been for 15 years. I nodded. "They fined me for mailbox height, twice." Grace smiled, a small, sad smile. "Everyone's been too afraid to push back. Until you." Word spread quickly. That evening, neighbors I'd only waved to in passing were stopping by, offering stories, copies of violation letters, and even HOA newsletters that hinted at more questionable spending. One neighbor, Thomas, a retired accountant, brought something even more useful: old financial summaries. "I've always found their numbers odd," he said, placing spreadsheets on my table. "Their reserve fund shrank by 40% over 2 years, but they only replaced 1 bench and planted 5 trees. Something doesn't add up." It was the kind of quiet uprising you don't notice until it's already moving, like a tide. The next day, I posted a short video online, calmly explaining my side of the story, sharing the facts, and showing the damage to my gate. I wasn't angry. I wasn't dramatic. I was simply a homeowner standing up for his rights. By evening, the video had over 800 views, mostly from inside the community. Then came the real surprise. At the HOA's emergency meeting that week, I arrived with my lawyer and sat quietly in the back. Grace was already there, seated in the front row with a few other seniors. Jennifer stood at the podium, trying to explain the board's actions with her usual poise, but her voice lacked its normal confidence. A woman stood up, someone I didn't know. "Why did we pay $5,000 last year for path maintenance on property we don't even own?" Murmurs followed. A man from the back shouted, "Is it true we've been funding legal fees to go after one homeowner?" Jennifer turned pale. "This isn't the time." "Yes, it is," Thomas interjected, standing beside Grace. "We deserve answers, and frankly, we deserve new leadership." What followed wasn't a mob. It was something more powerful, a community reclaiming its voice. People stood up, asked questions, and for the first time, they weren't shouted down or brushed aside. By the end of the night, a motion had been made: suspend the current board pending investigation. I stepped outside into the cool evening air, heart pounding, still unsure what had just happened. Grace followed me. "You started this," she said softly, "but now it belongs to all of us." For the first time since this all began, I didn't feel alone. The night of the final HOA meeting arrived with an eerie stillness. The sky was dusky gray, and a light wind rustled the old oak trees around the Cedar Lake Community Center. I arrived 10 minutes early, documents in hand, my lawyer walking beside me. Neither of us spoke as we entered, but the tension in the air was unmistakable. Inside, the room was already packed. More than 50 neighbors sat in folding chairs. Some I recognized from HOA cookouts, others I knew only by their mailboxes. But tonight, they were all here for the same reason. At the front of the room stood Jennifer Wilson, HOA president, pearl necklace gleaming, a forced smile fixed to her face. Beside her were Robert Davis and Michael Thompson, her loyal allies. They looked confident. But I knew something they didn't. My neighbors had begun to wake up. Jennifer cleared her throat and tapped the microphone. "This emergency session," she began, "was called to address continued non-compliance and threats to community harmony stemming from one homeowner's recent actions." Her eyes landed on me like a blade. I stood up, holding a single sheet of paper. "Before we go further, I'd like to request the floor." She hesitated, then nodded curtly. 2 minutes. My voice was calm but unwavering. "My name is Alex Davis. I've been a resident of this neighborhood for over a year. I've paid my dues, literally and figuratively. What started as a dispute over a locked gate has revealed something far more troubling than a simple disagreement about access. Murmurs echoed through the room. I held up the sheet. This is a verified copy of my property deed. It proves, beyond question, that the lake path behind my house is entirely private. Not shared, not HOA-owned, mine. Gasps, whispers, then silence. And this, I continued, holding up a second document, is a notarized report from the county zoning office confirming there has never been an easement granted on that land, meaning every violation notice, every fine, and the destruction of my lock was not only improper, it was criminal. Jennifer stepped forward, trying to interrupt, but my lawyer raised a hand. I also have security footage, I added, of board members trespassing on my property, attempting to cut my lock, at night. This footage has already been turned over to the police and charges are pending. Officer Reynolds stepped into the room from the back. Heads turned. He held up an evidence bag, my broken lock, and nodded slightly in my direction. I thought, I said, voice thick with emotion, that was the end of it. But then I learned about the $5,000 line item labeled Lake Access Maintenance on last year's HOA budget. Funds used to maintain property the board never owned. Now the room erupted, voices rising, neighbors turning toward each other in disbelief and anger. Thomas stood up. You charged us extra dues last year for that very maintenance. Twice. Another neighbor shouted, We want to see the books. Jennifer banged her gavel furiously. This is out of order. You can't... Actually, my lawyer said calmly, it's entirely in order. The board has not only overstepped legal bounds, but misrepresented financial information and targeted homeowners with fabricated violations. As the crowd's frustration grew louder, Grace, my elderly neighbor, stood up slowly. She held up a folder of her own. I've taken minutes at board meetings for 5 years, she said, voice clear and steady. And I've kept copies of every newsletter, every vote, every budget item. The numbers don't add up. Jennifer's face was pale. Robert looked ready to bolt. A voice from the back called out, Motion to suspend the current board pending investigation. Dozens of hands shot into the air. Mine was one of them. Officer Reynolds stepped forward again. We'll be following up on these financial allegations, but in the meantime, I advise the board to cooperate fully. Any attempts to obstruct could carry serious consequences. Jennifer stared at the crowd, realizing her control was slipping away. Her voice trembled. This is a witch hunt. No, I said softly. It's accountability, and it's long overdue. The meeting ended in a roar of voices, some angry, some hopeful, all determined. That night, we didn't just confront the board, we reclaimed our community. The courthouse was quiet that morning, eerily so. I sat in the back row, hands folded tightly in my lap, watching the sun spill through the stained glass windows. It had been months since the HOA had first tried to take my gate key. Back then, I had no idea I was stepping into a storm of fraud, threats, and criminal abuse of power. But today, the storm had moved into this courtroom. Jennifer Wilson, Robert Davis, and Michael Thompson sat at the defense table, noticeably paler than usual. Their once pristine reputations had been worn down by depositions, public outrage, and the relentless work of my lawyer, the police, and a few brave neighbors. Even now, Jennifer avoided my gaze, pretending to flip through a folder she'd long since stopped reading. The judge entered and everyone stood. Judge Calhoun was known across the county for being fair but firm. Today, his expression carried the weight of disappointment, like a school principal facing students who should have known better. Before the court, he began, are multiple charges of embezzlement, document forgery, harassment, trespassing, and unlawful fines carried out by members of the Maple Springs Homeowners Association Board. Whispers swept through the courtroom. The prosecutor stood and began to present the evidence. It was all there. Falsified violation records, HOA dues funneled to shell companies, fake maintenance charges for properties the HOA didn't even own, and most damning, financial records showing large transfers from the HOA's account directly into Jennifer's personal savings. What hit the hardest wasn't just the theft, it was the betrayal. My neighbors had trusted this board. Elderly residents had paid fines they couldn't afford. Families had altered their homes out of fear. Some had even sold and moved away. This wasn't just about a gate anymore. It was about a community that had been manipulated and drained for years. Then it was my lawyer's turn. Calm and measured, he laid out the timeline of abuse, presenting every bit of documentation I'd collected. He showed the footage of board members cutting my lock, the county deeds proving my land ownership, and the recorded threats I'd received. As each piece fell into place, I could feel the room shifting, toward truth, toward justice. When it came time for sentencing, the judge didn't hold back. "Jennifer Wilson," he said, "you wielded your position with arrogance and disregard for the law. You not only committed financial crimes, you tried to ruin the lives of people you were supposed to serve." He sentenced Jennifer and her accomplices to probation, community service, and full financial restitution. They avoided prison by cooperating and pleading guilty, but they would spend years repairing the damage they'd done, both financially and in the eyes of the public. The courtroom let out a collective sigh, not of triumph, but of release. The weight had lifted. Afterward, I stepped outside and found Grace waiting by the courthouse steps. "You did it," she said, handing me a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten thank you note signed by over 20 neighbors. My throat tightened. "We did it," I said quietly. As we walked to the parking lot, a local reporter approached and asked, "Was it worth it?" I looked out at the courthouse, at the people who had once doubted me now standing taller than before. "Yes," I replied. It wasn't just about my gate. It was about standing up, for myself, for my neighbors, and for the truth. Months after the courtroom doors closed and the last headline faded, peace finally settled over Maple Springs. Not just the kind of peace that comes with silence, but the deep-rooted calm that returns when a storm has passed, and the damage has been cleared with care. My gate still stood. The lock had been replaced, again, but not out of fear. This time it was a quiet symbol of boundaries honored and respect earned. What was once a target of controversy was now just a gate again, doing exactly what it was always meant to do: protect, not provoke. But the real victory wasn't in a piece of land or even in winning a legal battle. The true triumph was the transformation of a community that had once been ruled by fear and silence. Neighbors who barely made eye contact now gathered for morning coffee. Fences once used to divide now served as places to hang flower baskets and wave hello. And through it all, I learned a lesson that I believe matters, especially to those of us who have lived long enough to know how quickly things can change. The first lesson is this: never underestimate the power of documentation and preparation. My grandfather's habit of keeping records, surveys, and even receipts others would have tossed became my greatest weapon when the truth needed defending. In today's world of digital noise and fast talk, a carefully kept file folder still holds more strength than most people realize. The second lesson: don't be afraid to speak up, even when your voice shakes. I'll admit, there were nights I lay awake wondering if it was all worth it. I was called selfish, uncooperative, even dangerous. But silence would have meant giving up not just my rights, but my self-respect. Sometimes the cost of peace is too high when it comes at the price of justice. And lastly, community doesn't mean conformity. It's not about forcing everyone to look the same, live the same, or surrender their uniqueness to fit into someone else's mold. True community thrives when people are treated with fairness, listened to with respect, and protected equally under the law. Grace, the elderly neighbor who once feared her HOA more than she feared bad weather, now serves proudly on the new board. Thomas, who once paid fines in silence, now oversees transparent financial reporting. And as for me, I tend my garden, I walk my lake path, and I rest easier knowing that even one voice, when joined by truth and a few good neighbors, can make a difference. To those listening, especially those in their golden years who've seen the world change in every way imaginable, don't let anyone tell you you're too old to fight back, too late to be heard, or too small to matter. Sometimes a quiet act of resistance, like locking a gate, is all it takes to open the door to real change. And that, I believe, is a legacy worth passing on.